Hello and a very warm welcome to Sticky Marketing TV, the show that is to marketing what a can opener is to a tin of beans. Essential unless you're happy to just stare at the label. Ride the laugh. Joining me in the studio this month to stir the beans, our regular guest Grant Leboeuf, international speaker, best-selling author and sales and marketing guru. And making the toast, best-selling author and international speaker Simon Hazeldine, described on his website as a hard-hitting speaker who will give you a wake-up call that you'll remember forever. So nothing much to live up to there, Simon. Simon has a master's degree in the psychology and management of performance and writes on the psychology of performance for several leading magazines. He's certified as a master practitioner and trainer of neuro-linguistic programming and is a fellow of the Institute of Sales and Marketing Management. He's also the author of this book, Bareknuckle Negotiating, and subtitled Knockout Negotiation Tactics They Won't Teach You at Business School, and also hot off the press, the DVD version as well. Simon, thank you for joining us on Sticky Marketing TV. It's quite a testosterone-fueled title, if you don't mind me saying so.
Absolutely.
And when I actually started reading it, negotiation, it seems to me, is not a testosterone-fueled activity, or it doesn't have to be.
No, the Bareknuckle is actually a reference to, I was a martial artist many years ago, a traditional Japanese martial artist, went to do some work as a doorman and rapidly found out that what works in the gym does not work in the streets. Painfully, I may add, so I had to alter my approach to actually finding out what works. So that's a reference to stripping it back to the bare essentials and what absolutely works.
I have got to, Matt, could you just get a close-up of the cover there? Because I've got to show you this picture of Simon here. And I was actually quite intimidated by that picture.
Okay, good. It's achieved its objectives.
Good, right, okay. Right. So I'm being very nice to you. There's a lot in this book, obviously, so we can't summarise it in 20 minutes, but selling and negotiation, I know you've written another book called Bareknuckle Selling, I believe. They're clearly very related topics.
Absolutely.
So could you quickly tell me where does selling stop and negotiation start?
Okay, they are inextricably linked together and they don't necessarily follow sequentially, but my definition of selling is persuading the customer to buy your product or services, so basically to buy you, and negotiation is agreeing the terms upon which that sale will take place. So theoretically and also sensibly pragmatically, you want to sell first, convince the customer of the value, and then negotiate as good a deal as you possibly can. Okay. So that was where I would see those two fitting together.
Right. Grant, as an expert in sales and marketing, negotiation is obviously in there as part of the mix. And what's your sort of view of this? Where do you think negotiation fits into all this with your clients?
Well, I think Simon's exactly right. It's after the sale's taken place in an ideal world is when you start the negotiation. Otherwise, what you're actually doing is you're negotiating when the person hasn't convinced they even want it yet, which means there's no mark you can go, because negotiating only really works where both parties actually care. So you have to make sure that you've actually sold before you negotiate. I think it's a problem because people do make that mistake. They start the negotiation too early. I don't know if you find that, and then you've got all sorts of problems.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that I got from the book was the different styles, if you like, of negotiation. You talk about competitive negotiation, you talk about collaborative negotiation. Expand on that for me.
Okay, well, it's broadly speaking, although I think there's a spectrum in a negotiation of different styles. Broadly speaking, we can think of two styles. One is a kind of competitive win-lose, so I win at your expense. So we're kind of arguing over who gets the biggest slice of the cake. And then a more collaborative style of negotiation where we're focused on creating as much value for possible, what's generally called a win-win style. Now, obviously, that's a little bit black and white. I will use competitive negotiation if I'm doing one-off transactional purchases, so things like buying a car or buying, as I did, double glazing. We're very competitive. My aim is to get the lowest possible price. I don't need to have a long-term relationship, so I'll use tactics, techniques, manipulation, etc. Whereas if I'm working with my clients wanting to build a long-term profitable relationship, then obviously we have to go for that more collaborative win-win. But a good negotiator can work either side and anywhere along the continuum, because you need to have that behavioural flexibility.
Right, so I was going to say, so you can't necessarily make the decision about the style you're going to use before you start the negotiation. It might be that you have to adjust it.
I think you would, as part of your planning and preparing, you would definitely think about the appropriate style to follow. But if it's a one-off transactional one, I would usually tend to err on the side of getting as much as I can and having less concern about the other party.
So next time I buy a car, would you mind coming with me?
Absolutely, no problem at all. I'm available for a fee.
Oh.
Did you want to negotiate that now, David?
Yeah, I think. Okay. Yeah. Grant, would you mind doing the negotiation? Grant, I know you have some negotiation background as well. Is that your experience as well? You know, it depends on the type of transaction. It depends on the what you're trying to get from it, really, with the style you choose.
Yeah, I think that's right. If you look at it from a business to business point of view, of course, we never want one-off transactions anyway. I know someone's talking about those one-off purchases like going to a car, but from a business point of view, there's always the long term, and then there's always the reputation side of things to think of as well. So I think in the business world, certainly when you're dealing with customers, clients and that kind of thing, that we're always looking at a more collaborative style where both parties feel they've got something at the end.
Absolutely.
Although there is room for the other as well.
Absolutely. And also I would say that collaborative style is not necessarily easier either than the competitive style. In fact, I think it's harder to do. It's much more complex and much more difficult to do.
Right, okay. A question I often ask experts in all sorts of fields is, can you be a natural born, in this case, negotiator, or can you learn it? I mean, is it...
Yeah. As we make a huge amount of money training people every year to be negotiators, I would definitely have to say it is trainable. It's something you can learn. However...
But can anybody learn it, though? I mean, literally anybody?
Pretty much so, yes. But I think there are certain people who just appear to settle into that role a lot more successfully. The big area we find, where we spend a lot of time working, is with salespeople. Most salespeople around selling are probably, if you ask them how good they are, they would probably say they're an 8 or a 9, something like that. Their confidence level around negotiation would be around a 3 or a 4. Yeah. So they're much more comfortable with the selling than they are with the negotiating, and that's where the professional buyers get a distinct advantage.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, do salesmen tend to have to negotiate these days? I mean, are there sort of dual roles?
Generally, it'll be the salesperson's responsibility to do the negotiation. Professional buyers will pull them into the negotiation as fast as possible. They will act with great indifference to any sales proposal that's made because they don't want to give away any of their power. Yeah. And I would say it's a general weakness in our experience across, say, British and international sales forces. They're better salespeople than they are negotiators, by and large.
Right. One of the things I got from the book was that a key characteristic, and I suppose this is perhaps obvious, is patience. Yeah. That you've got to be prepared to play the long game sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It is. I was reading a book recently by Donald Trump's lawyer. So this is the kind of the guy behind the Trump empire who does their negotiation, and he talks specifically about a tactic of slowing down a negotiation or speeding it up as it suits you. Generally, the person with the greatest urgency is the person with the least power in a negotiation situation. If you have to get the deal closed by a certain date, that will put you under a huge amount of pressure, where a more patient negotiator sometimes will extract a better deal. And buyers often find out that salespeople have a month target or a quarter target and use that to their advantage. I mean, I certainly do.
Right. Grant, do you think with the availability of all the information that's there online and so on and so forth, that you can use that to your advantage when you're negotiating? Because you obviously presumably research around the other person in your negotiation, your opposite number, if you like, is possible. So I mean, I'm going to ask Simon in a minute about something he calls the 2P principle. Mm-hmm. But before I do that, I mean, what's your view of that? I mean, do you think we can be better prepared now?
Yeah, I think understanding the organisation, if it's a business, is vital, and also understanding the motivations of the people. I think one of the things that salespeople particularly don't do very well sometimes in negotiation is to actually think about what the motivations of the buyers are. One of the things we advocate in sticky marketing is these problem maps, where you can identify using problem maps what the motivations are, what the issues and the challenges your client, your customer has. And if you understand what they are, it's much easier then, if you understand their motivations, to have a collaborative deal where you can say, well, I know this is of high value to you, and actually I can do that, but this is important to me, and then you can extract there are some variables to negotiate with, and it can actually be very friendly, because I think the other thing salespeople particularly aren't good at negotiation about is they get worried about destroying the relationship, because they see it as, competitive and combative, and it doesn't actually have to be like that.
It can be tough without it being unpleasant. That's perfectly valid. And
Right.
to underline Grant's point, we always say to people when we're training them, get inside the other person's head, see the world through their eyes, think about their problems, think about what they're looking for, and then you're far better able to get a deal that works for both parties. Right. People spend too much time in their own head, they need to be in the other person's head.
So you mentioned this 2P principle, which I alluded to just then, planning and preparation.
Yeah.
You must do both. You state very
yeah.
clearly in the book. Yeah. And I struggled a bit at first until I started reading past that, what the difference was.
Okay, yeah.
Perhaps you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, there's planning the approach, gathering the information you need, pulling all that together. And I have a sort of a negotiation planning template that I take people through, because one of the things people struggle with around planning is, one, the time, and two, how do I plan for this negotiation? So we take them through objective setting and looking at the other party. So gathering, getting all that information, and then preparing is having all the information ready to go into the negotiation. I believe, and I've said many times, that your success as a negotiator is 80 to 90% down to your planning and preparation that you do. You'll come into it more confident, you'll have all the information you need, you'll be aware of any weaknesses, any strengths that you can leverage, and you'll be in a far better position. And I always test in a negotiation how planned and prepared the other person is. And if they start giving me information that says they're not, then my expectation of what I can achieve goes up, and my confidence goes up.
And again, talking of your reading of the other person or your research, planning, preparation beforehand, if the other person is clearly in a more powerful position than you. I mean, and you, again, this is a big section of your book, power and negotiation. So I'm a little, I don't know, dairy farmer, and I'm negotiating with Sainsbury's to supply their milk. I mean, you know, the cards are kind of stacked against you, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, you're not always going to be in a more powerful position. But let me tell you an interesting thing. I'll always ask people when I work with them who has the most power, them or the other person. And 95% of the time, irrespective of whether I'm working with procurement people or salespeople, whichever side, they'll say the other person.
Okay.
So there's a general tendency that we give away more of our power than we should do. But if you are in a weaker position, that's when you really have to do your planning and preparation to think about how you would offset the other party's power. And in the case of, say, the small dairy farmer, we'll sometimes say to people, if they think they're having a really difficult time with a client and the negotiation's not going well, and we'll say, okay, so why are they still having meetings with you then? If they're not interested, if they're telling you they're not interested, etc., why are they having meetings with you? So even if you're in a weaker position, you can still negotiate.
There's an interesting example in your book, I think, where you cite a case with it might have even been an early experience of yours. I can't quite remember, but there's an experienced person and a less experienced person, and the less experienced person gets rather beaten up by the opposite number.
That was me.
It was you.
I was the one getting beaten up. Yeah.
And then the more experienced person comes into the next meeting and kind of does something completely unexpected.
Yeah.
They threaten to walk away.
Yeah.
And as a result, they win the negotiation, or they get the result they want.
Yeah.
So that's a risk, isn't it?
It was, but the guy concerned was a hugely experienced individual. We were operating in a marketplace where we had a couple of market-leading brands that the wholesaler were concerned needed to have and needed to stock. So he knew it was a bit of a hollow threat to delisters entirely, and also he just completely outclassed the other person and just called his bluff. And it was a very overt kind of move, and it was. I was sitting there, as you can imagine, wet behind the ears. So I was terrified, thinking, "Oh my God, he's about to lose my client for me." But he didn't. He was just understanding the other party, and he was one of my very early negotiation mentors.
So that was a good example of the planning and preparation.
Absolutely, yeah. He knew where the power lay and used it.
Grant, have you got any examples in your career where negotiation has come kind of close to the edge, or you've either, or perhaps you failed in a negotiation because of inexperience or something?
Yeah, I think it's a steep learning curve, negotiation. And also, what's really interesting is negotiating with different cultures. So one of my earliest experiences was negotiating with Sony on behalf of a media company I was working with, and what I didn't realise is how in Japanese culture silence is used as a sort of method for breaking people. So I remember saying to this particular gentleman, "Can we go ahead?" And we just literally, I had a clock above his head, not above mine. And my boss was like kicking me under the table to say, "Don't say a word." And we sat there for 10 minutes in absolute silence before he kind of looked at us and said yes. And I've got to say, it was the longest 10. We knew it was 10 minutes because we had the clock there, but it was the longest 10 minutes of my life.
Yeah.
And it was a steep learning curve to understand how negotiating is. There are some principles behind it, which I know is in Simon's book, but there's also culturally plays out quite differently as well.
Yeah.
It's if you are negotiating internationally, sussing out the culture is of vital importance, because they behave different ways, different value sets.
Yeah.
So.
I must admit, people have suggested to me that I shut up for 10 minutes from time to time. But that may be something altogether different. So, in summary, I mean, if you're in business, whether you're a salesperson or you're running your own business, or you're a consultant or whatever you are, sooner or later you're going to have to negotiate, aren't you?
You're negotiating pretty much all the time, Dave. In business, it's just a life skill, it's a business skill, and it's an essential skill.
Yeah.
And in business, I think Chester Carras, the American negotiation guru, said, in business you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And lots of businesses probably deserve to be charging higher prices for what they do. They'll only be able to do that if they've got the ability to negotiate.
And are there any simple, I mean, if they haven't got the advantage of somebody like you helping them and training them, if they're just sort of dropped in the deep end, are there any simple tips you could suggest that would help them?
I'd say right from the start is do your research on the organisation, do research on the company, do that sort of research. Be very clear about what it is you want to get out of the negotiation, but remain flexible and open to other opportunities coming in. Think about it from the other person's side. Spend all your time thinking about what they're looking for and ways that you can help them to get it. And then look for things that you can swap and trade between the two of you that will add the maximum value. And don't give away your power. Don't give away your power. Be confident in what you've got. Be confident in what you're doing. And in that way, you should be able to negotiate a better deal.
Fantastic. Well, look, here's the book, Bareknuckle Negotiating. I still can't say the title. I found it very interesting, I have to say. As well as the rather scary photo on the front, I also noticed you quoted Al Capone in there.
Yes,
Something about you're better with a gun, or I can't remember the exact quote. I may have it here.
It says you'll get further with a kind word and a gun than you'll get with a kind word. It was a reference to power, I think, wasn't it?
Okay, so we're not saying we should be sort of like a Chicago gangster from the 30s.
Absolutely not. No. That wouldn't be a good negotiation approach at all.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for joining us. Thank you, Grant, as well. If you've enjoyed this edition of Sticky Marketing TV and our sideways look at marketing, then why not join us again next month for more Sticky Marketing TV.